Communication works for those who work at it. That's a quote by John Powell. Today I have a second one. The most important thing in communication is to hear what is not being said. That's a quote from Peter F. Drucker. Welcome, good morning to this 30-day live stream about intrapreneurship. My name is Jürgen Moors, coach. I'm a consultant and a strategic advisor. And for those who followed the 30-day live stream so far, you know that today I kicked off with 2 quotes instead of 1, which I did most of the time over the last couple of days. Now, why did I do that? Well, let me repeat them again. Communication works for those who work at it. And the most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said. I stressed out very strongly the verbs. Why? Because communication is all about inactivity. You have to put in an effort to communicate, whether you're talking, and even more when you are listening. Now, if you want to become a successful entrepreneur, then it is crucial that you work and look at your communication skills because you are working inside a large organization. Meaning, if you look at the spread, probably you're globally oriented. You have a global footprint. You have different types of culture. You often have silos. So communication is one thing that will become really important to spread your message downward, but also up to management. And why is it even more important for you as a person, as a successful entrepreneur, is you will need to be able to collaborate with international groups, with customers, with external partners, internal partners inside all of those silos. You will bring innovation. But if you bring innovation, in most cases, in almost all cases, it will be linked to change trajectories. And change trajectories, they become successful or not, dependent again on one major pillar, and that's communication. And then you have the organizational culture that you're working in. Depending on how your organization is structured and the culture that is there, you have to see how can I use my communication to fight this organizational culture or to use this organizational culture to my benefit when I bring my projects forward. Now, if you look at communication, there are 3 major strategies that you always have to look at. And that's the first thing is your message. It needs to be very clear and concise. Remember, you are a successful entrepreneur who is going to bring innovations. You've probably been looking at it, working at it with a team or with a group for a longer period of time. But it also means you are getting used to the what I call innovation slang that is linked with that innovation. When you bring this to another group, whether it's up to management to defend your project or when you actually start implementing it, be aware that they are not so long in that innovation topic. So use easy to understand message. Also, demonstrate empathy. Make sure that you listen to a speaker's viewpoint if they say something in this message. Then, so make your language simple, direct. Then, second thing, active listening. When you bring your message, when you bring it either to management, when you bring it to any group where you're going to implement it, make sure that you listen, actively listen. If somebody asks a question, if somebody says something, if somebody opposes you, don't think about your response immediately. No, make sure that you listen to what is being said, let it sink through, and it's okay to say give me a couple of seconds. I just want to make sure that I understand it well, and then respond in whatever way you want to respond. But first acknowledge the viewpoint of the person. If you're not certain, then repeat that viewpoint. Show that you have listened and what you understood. So you make sure that there is no miscommunication or misunderstanding from the beginning. So listen actively. And the third thing is consider the channels that you use. Meaning, these days, there are so many channels. We used to have email, we used to have phone, we have instant messaging, for instance. Well, depending on the message that you want to bring, make sure that you choose the right one. Also, prioritize your channel dependent on how urgent is my message. Is it just information? Is it really something urgent? Maybe you can do this with some kind of messaging channel, or is it something that's important but that can wait when you actually read it? So those three things are crucial when you think as an entrepreneur, as a successful entrepreneur, and when you want to bring innovation, whether it's to management, to your colleagues, or to those where it is implemented. Think about your message. Listen actively when you bring the message, and think about the channel that you use for your message. Now, what are some best practices? When you bring innovations, make sure that you create some kind of feedback mechanisms, meaning you give the management, give the employees a chance to interact with you, to give you feedback about how it is working, maybe specific for a project, but also in general, how they feel that these projects are being brought when you bring a lot of innovations. It's important that you also refine your systematic approach. How I typically did that when I was leading a team at my former employer, where we went from a trajectory where we had the least digitized unit to the most digitized unit over a course of 10 years. And the time span was because we had such a broad asset base and an old asset base. So it brought some additional challenges with it. Was that every 3 to 6 months I would go to the shift because we worked on a full continuous shift system, 365 days, 24/7. That also meant that some people were working the night shift and it regularly rotated, and they also took vacation holidays. So it sometimes I didn't see certain persons for 2 3 weeks, even when I calculated in my own absence. And so every 3 to 6 months, I went down and I talked to them. I took the time, mostly after the day shift was gone. So when we had a relaxed moment and nothing was going on in the installation, and then I would share with them, okay, what did we do in the past? Where we are coming from? What were our goals? What did we achieve? Why not? Where are we? And where are we going? And if there were very specific topics around a certain project, I would talk about them as well. And we had an open discussion. Everybody could ask questions or give his feedback or her feedback. And then there was also always time for anything else. So they could, that was not related to what my message, but they could also bring other stuff. And that way there was a feedback loop coming up. Be aware of any sensitivity, whether it's cultural or anything else, or awareness that you need to be taking into account. When I go back to my personal story again, yeah, in this digitization story, if I looked at my team, there were people on the one side of the bar that had just graduated, and there were people on the other side of the bar. Those were people that were close to retirement. Now, if you look at their digital skills and the digital understanding in general, and the language understanding or the word understanding, yeah, this is a huge gap. So every time when I brought a message, I need to be very aware that everybody gonna understand this, and not because I understand it and I'm more into digital. I'll probably relate to the younger generation, and they will follow me. But are the other ones also able to follow me? Also, they're also understanding. So this is also important to your sensitivity and your awareness. And make sure you structure the communication. That's also best practice, meaning get a certain systematic behind it. It makes it easier for you in your innovation project as a successful entrepreneur, because you will guarantee that there is communication. Because if things are starting getting wrong, or your deadlines are starting to shift, or everything is getting really crammed up, and when you get close to your implementation, the first thing that we often forget is about communication. When you make it a structured way, it also helps. And that's something what I also did to my project managers who brought all the innovations, the digital innovations, into my unit. They would, at a regular basis, I urged them to go to the team, talk about it. And in the beginning, when we were still working towards a certain innovation, you would see that they would go once every couple of months. When there was a relevant update, they would go. And as sooner as we came to actual implementation and everything became very clear, and the impact was also very clear, then they would go more often, and especially during implementation, they would be there a lot to make sure that this feedback mechanism and this loop would actually be going. So those are very important things and best practices that you can actually use. Now, one thing how communication can go wrong, it's just one example from my past when I worked in Germany and I was working on a project of thermoelectrics. I was working for a chemical company at the time, and we were working throughout the value chain at a certain project. And on the one hand side, you had the people from our company, the chemists that were in chemical labs and had their ways and culture of doing things, and they were always in a meeting with the end customer. In this case, it was a car manufacturer, where most of the time were engineers, and a lot of times were mechanical and electrical engineers. When I joined the project didn't run so well, and the first couple of meetings became very clear to me why. It was like sitting at a war table, because they were shouting, and after a while it was very clear to me they did not understand each other. They had a different set of languages, of words that they used, that they could not understand. The chemists were talking about handling something with very care, and how something is handled, and the meaning of care and safety in a chemical lab is completely different than if you look at a car manufacturing plant, where care and how you handle things and safety is actually implemented. These are two different worlds, but these people did not understand each other. So the role that I took to improve communication, and that is also when the project started working to move really forward, is I try to translate, to mediate from, no, 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 you understood this wrong. This is what he said, and this is what this means for you, and the other way around. And that's how we got the project forward. So communication can really mess up a project, especially an innovation project, if people do not understand each other very well. And this also brings me to the end of this story about communication and the importance of communication as a successful entrepreneur. Remember, think about the clarity of your message, think about the channel you choose in the end, and also think about active listening. Those are three key components that you need to take into account. And when you look at some best practices, remember, make sure you have certain feedback mechanisms. Make sure that you are aware to differences, sensitivities, cultural differences in your group or organization, and make sure that you get a certain structure inside your communication, because when it gets busy, this is one of the first things you might forget. Now, I urge you, before we go into tomorrow's session, to think about, when I look at my own communication skills, what in the past, and I look at some of the projects in the past, where as an entrepreneur can I refine my skills? What did I maybe do wrong? What can I adjust? Where did everything go right? Make that self clear for you, that you have a picture from, okay, there is a small gap in my communication skills that I can improve. And with that, I'd like to say goodbye, and I see you tomorrow for another day of a live streaming around entrepreneurship. And tomorrow we'll look at another skill, and it will be building your own resilience and adaptability. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.